Much more to discuss here. So for that, we connect with author and journalist Genelle Aldred in London. Genelle, good to have you with us again. Appreciate you taking the time. What was your reaction to this news today?
I think the past few weeks there has been a lot of speculation about what was going on. And so to hear this is what it was, I think most people will be quite shocked, because once conspiracy theories or rumour mills go into overdrive, everything gets drawn into the equation. So to actually know, and, a couple of weeks ago or about a week ago, we thought we were going to hear an announcement from the Palace. They said the BBC was prepped, and then nothing came down last weekend, but it has come down now.
And how do you think, this is, of course, she's a human being going through a difficult cancer diagnosis and treatment. Chemotherapy is really tough on people, as anyone who's had family knows that, or who's gone through it themselves. But it's also about public relations. How do you think she was served by the Kensington Palace PR team?
I don't think she was served very well in a sense, because it's, you hear those statements from the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition saying about lurid details and people questioning things, but people are going to question. She's the future queen of this country. And so, of course, people are curious about her life in many ways, many guises, and the sudden kind of disappearance and leaving public life. And then a few, what I would call PR missteps that happened along the way, the Mother's Day photo. I think these were things that didn't need to happen. And I think it's very interesting the different ways that Buckingham Palace dealt with King Charles's cancer diagnosis in comparison to this. And they kind of came out very upfront, this is what it is. And so what you see is there's no gap, there's no space there for things to creep in about what could it be. We don't know in both cases what the kind of cancer is. Both of them found the diagnosis after having surgery, but just dealt with it in very, very different ways. I understand, as a person, it's a hard diagnosis. I know people who've been on that journey, and it's devastating. It takes you time to come to terms with it. There's a sense of wanting to be very private until you're ready to talk about it. The difference here is you're in a very, very public state role. So it's not just that you're an actor or an actress, you're part of the setup and the mechanics of how this country runs. And so people are very curious. And so it's a very different thing from them being on the front pages all the time and us finding out where they are, what they're doing, what they're opening, to this wall of silence. And so I don't think she was served all that well, because I think we can directly compare it to how Buckingham Palace dealt with it and see how that had a different kind of outcome, a different kind of noise around the news.
So, Genelle, I want to ask you about that, because, there is a difference of opinion that has been out there over the course of the interviews that I've done this afternoon on whether or not she is not the sovereign. She is not, and she is not in the line of succession. But as you say, she will be a future queen. So how appropriate is it for all of us to be asking these questions about her health?
On one hand, it's inappropriate because it's a personal thing. On the other hand, she is part of the mechanics of this family, and there are 4 senior royals now. They slimmed down monarchy. The whole point of that was to have fewer people on show. Taxpayers do pay towards, the palaces, all of these things. It is complicated and it's complex. And I think there's no easy answer, because one answer sounds quite inhumane. They're kind of workers and we're entitled to know. The other side says, we're not entitled to know, but we do, on the other hand, contribute, taxpayers do, to all that goes on around the monarchy. They're part of the state, heads of state. She's married to the future head of the state. Her son will be King of England one day. And so in that sense, it's not just about the public are interested. There's a public interest in understanding how the monarchy is functioning, who is, kind of on duty and all of those things. And I think with King Charles, it was very upfront and we understood what was happening. So, as I said, there's no vacuum. There was a vacuum of information and people filled that vacuum of information. And I don't know if actually what filled the vacuum wasn't worse than if people had have known the diagnosis. I think actually she probably would have had maybe a bit more privacy and time to deal with it had that vacuum of information been filled. of course, you go back in time, you do things differently, maybe. But, it's easy to say with hindsight. But I think with hindsight, you can see things got a bit out of control.
Tell me a little bit more about why do you think there is this sort of this push and pull, this desire to keep things private for so long, and then all of a sudden this vacuum happens? Why not be more public and more transparent, given the public roles that they have?
I guess it is that thing of a person dealing with something really, really challenging. And I think, many of us can relate to when you've had some bad news or some big news or some life-altering news. And sometimes it's hard to tell the people that you love, or it's hard to have it out there. You don't want people, it's a weird mix of you want people to know so you can get on with it, but also you don't want the pity or the sympathy, or you just want to come to terms with it yourself. And in the very most human sense, I understand all of those things. The problem sometimes when we don't share things is the longer you don't share it is the harder it becomes to share, and the bigger it becomes both in your mind and in the mind of others. And I think that's a bit of what's happened here. It's just gotten bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until it's almost out of control. And I think things like the Mother's Day photo, they didn't have to release one. They kind of said you're not going to see her until after Easter. And I think if they'd held that line, maybe things wouldn't have spiraled the way they did. But then you get this drip feed of, you see her in a car with him, you see a Mother's Day photo, and then that opens up the conversation yet again to, where is she? What's going on? She obviously is around, but not around. What's happening? And so I think in that sense, I can understand the reticence to share this news. Very personal, very deep, very complex, big news, life-altering news. On the other hand, you are a public figure. There will be interest. People are going to print stories. The press, it's their job, it's the media's job to talk about people that are in the public interest and in the public eye. You can't really blame them for doing that. The tone that it took was just because of a vacuum of information.
And Genelle, she said in that video, she said that it took her time to recover from the major surgery in order to start the treatment. But most importantly, it has taken us time to explain everything to George, Charlotte, and Louis in a way that is appropriate for them, and to reassure them that I am going to be okay. There's also that factor, right? She's got young children.
And that is an important piece of the puzzle. And, in a sense, either way you go, if you've gone this way where they're probably hearing people saying all kinds of things, even though they might know that's not true, it puts that doubt in children's mind anyway, because they're probably hearing things from other people in a kind of a drip feed way, or maybe just curiosity about where their mummy is. And so, in one sense, it's tricky. There are no easy answers, I think, with this. And we can say there's a right way. I don't think there's a right way to do it, because it's 6 of one, half dozen of the other. You fill the vacuum with the real truth, and that gives one sense of the walls closing in. You don't put things, you leave that vacuum, people fill it with their own stuff. That brings the walls in another sense. But I guess as any parent, and I'm child free myself, but for parents, they want to make that decision about how their children consume this information, and they know when they're ready to hear more. So I think it has been a very, very difficult situation, and maybe handled slightly differently. I think the public perception and all that's kind of transpired maybe would have been handled very differently.
Genelle, what have you been hearing from people in London about this news?
I must admit, I was out when the news kind of broke. One of my friends messaged me, we finally know, because as a journalist, I have lots of friends who are journalists. So we've all been following this with curiosity. And so it was kind of like, okay, well, that's what it is, because we were all expecting, as I mentioned earlier, last weekend, to kind of get that news coming down as to what was actually happening. So I think everyone is just, now we know. I think we will have endless days of coverage of this. That's just kind of the way this goes. But I think in a sense, it settles down a lot of the other stuff, which is it this? Is it this? Is it that? Is it the other? So I think in a sense, people are like, okay, that's it. And I think actually there'll be a lot of sympathy for her, because you'd be quite a mean-spirited person to not wish her a speedy recovery and to get well soon, and to hope that everything ends in the best way possible. But I think now that everybody knows, it will take a lot of the heat out of this story.
And then just briefly, Genelle, that there's also, of course, the king that is going through his own treatment. Can you just talk a little bit about kind of the impact that this would be having on the royal family?
Yeah, the slimmed down royal family that was meant to, cost taxpayers a bit less and be more efficient and be more modern. And now two of those people are now, sadly unwell and receiving treatment for cancer. And they're not biologically, related. It's his daughter-in-law. But this does then you say, okay, well, now we have this slimmed down monarchy. Now there's fewer people out on engagements. And, people were saying all sorts of things about William and his behavior. Now it transpires, both his father and his wife have both been diagnosed with cancer in short succession. That can't be easy to go out and be doing the work and knowing that all of this is kind of going on at home. So I do think it does present a few questions about what does this shape look like, what will happen over the next couple of months, over the summer. But time will only tell what they do. There are other royals around that, they just haven't been part of the working royal setup. So we will see probably some of those people come to the fore. It does raise the question of Prince Andrew and all of those things. So we'll have to see how it all pans out. But it's really unfortunate both for them and what they're going through, but also at a time when the royal family, want to modernise and want to show they're here for the future. This is a challenging moment.
Genelle, appreciate you coming on and talking to us very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Author and journalist Genelle Aldred in London.